Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Thank you. Welcome everyone to Hugh Ross's Paradoxes class. I'm Mark Perez, introducing Hugh Ross. We're very happy you're here. It's 1:30 Pacific Daylight Time, and what is it, the 30th of April today, or 31st of April? May 1st. Wow. Okay, May 1st, 2022. So welcome to everybody to the second installment of our in-person Paradoxes class at Reasons to Believe headquarters. So we encourage anybody who's online, if you're in the area, please drop in. Anybody who's here right now or who'd like to show up, we want to remind you that on my right side, we have coffee and refreshments provided by people who come. So thank you for those who have brought treats and goodies. We appreciate you doing that. Thank you to Hugh Ross. He even brought his sandwiches, and he's the one who's doing all the work. So thank you, Hugh, for your supplies as well. And to all the rest of you, thank you. For those of you who are here, if you need to use the bathrooms, it's straight through the door, to the right, to the left. And that's the only bathrooms there are. Please feel free to use them. And with that, I will hand the baton off to Hugh Ross. Hugh, welcome. It's all yours now, sir.
Thank you. Well, now that we're meeting in person, we're going to be doing a little different format. It's no longer going to be a 2.5 hour Zoom meeting. The format every week will be approximately 30 minutes of teaching, followed by about 40 minutes or less of Q&A. And we're going to be able to do high quality recordings. So the goal is that we're going to be doing relatively short series. The series I'm launching today is going to be 3 weeks. This will be the first of 3 weeks. But then that'll all be archived on the YouTube channel. In fact, on a number of different YouTube channels. Paradoxes.org has its own YouTube channel now, and Reasons to Believe also has a YouTube channel. And so if you're not already a subscriber to the Reasons to Believe YouTube channel, there's literally thousands of videos you can watch there, and we're posting new ones every time. And if you don't get to ask your question, and by the way, we're taking questions from the virtual audience. Anyone who's not able to come here in person, the URL for the YouTube Live is posted at paradoxes.org, and I post it every week on my Facebook and Twitter pages. And so you can always go there to see what the topic will be and what the link is if you want to participate virtually. But we do encourage you to come here in person. Having questions live from an audience like this does make for a better video recording. But the series that we're going to be launching today is Are We Alone? And I covered a little bit of that, and we were still in the Zoom environment, but I've upgraded the talk, so this will be some new for some of you and not so new for the rest of you. But I've got it in 3 parts. The part I'm going to cover today, are we alone? What does the Bible say about whether or not we're the only life in the universe, or are we the only intelligent life in the universe, or the only spiritual life in the universe? So we're going to cover today what the Bible's got to say about this subject, and the next 2 weeks we're going to look at what the cosmos has got to say. And as you can probably guess, there's a lot more detail on what the cosmos has got to say about this issue than what the Bible's got to say. But the Bible is not silent. And there's actually been a 2,000-year-long debate within the Christian community attempting to ask the question, are we humans alone in the universe? And a couple of Bible passages that apply. This one is from Isaiah. It says, this is what the Lord says, the creator of the heavens, who stretches them out, who spreads out the earth with all that springs from it, who gives breath to its people and life to all who walk on it. And the first point here is just one of many that you'll see in the book of Isaiah, and it's not just Isaiah, but Isaiah emphasizes this much more than any other book of the Bible, is that God is the one and only creator. In other words, any life that exists, it's here because of the handiwork of the creator God of the Bible. God is the creator of all life. But as you go through these different Bible texts, not just in Isaiah but other passages, God appears to really enjoy creating life. And creating life in great abundance and great diversity. And so this has caused Christians going back to the first century AD saying, well, given how much Isaiah says about God creating life and the psalmist saying about God creating life, why would he stop at just one planet? I mean, even 2,000 years ago, people were aware that there were tens of thousands of stars in the cosmos. Today we know that there's 2 trillion galaxies in the universe, and each galaxy on average has about 200 billion stars. And it's possible that there's as many planets as there are stars. And so why would God stop at just one planet? And then we see this text. This is Isaiah 42:5. What we see in Isaiah 44:24, I am the Lord who made everything. So again, God takes credit for everything that exists. If life exists, it's because God is there. And for those of you that have been with us in the Paradoxes class for some number of years, you can recall that about a year and a half ago, we did a study, actually it's almost 2 years ago. We went through the entire book of Isaiah, looking what the book of Isaiah says about creation. And what we notice is all 3 members of the Godhead, the Holy Spirit, God the Father, and the Messiah, they all take credit for being the creator of everything that exists. And yet we see in the book of Isaiah the repeated statement, there's one and only one creator. And so we did a whole study going through the entirety of the book of Isaiah, basically showing that of all the it's the book of Isaiah that has the most to say about the doctrine of the Trinity, the concept that there's a single God, one essence manifested in 3 distinct persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. By one essence, we mean that they all have the same mind, the same purposes, the same attributes and characteristics. As Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So one essence, 3 persons, the triune God. But what you see in the book of Isaiah is the repeated phrase that God is the creator of everything that exists. And all 3 persons take a role in creation. You see that in the book of Genesis, where again it emphasizes that there are all 3 members of the Godhead that participate in the creation. So the Trinity is literally taught from the first page of the Bible. And then we have this text in the Hebrews that provides a possible constraint on the extent with which God may have created life elsewhere in the universe. It says in chapter 10, verses 12 and 14, the priest, and this is referring to the high priest, had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins. This priest referring to Jesus. Basically what you see in the book of Hebrews is that you have the Aaronic priesthood, you've got the high priest, but all this is symbolic of the one and only priest that can sacrifice for all sins. But notice what it says here, that this priest, namely Jesus Christ, had offered himself as a sacrifice for all time, one sacrifice for sins. So it's making the point that when Jesus died on the cross, that death on the cross, that one event of dying one time on the cross, sacrifice for all sins. By one sacrifice, he made perfect forever those who are made holy. And this has led to a lot of debate amongst Christians over the centuries. Okay, does this eliminate the possibility that there could be other beings like us in the universe that are in need of redemption? And people have said, well, it's possible that God may have created grass on another planet. Grass wouldn't need to be redeemed. He could have created whales and dolphins on another planet. They wouldn't need to be redeemed. This only puts a constraint on another planet that would have beings like us that are intelligent and spiritual, who have sinned or are in need of redemption. And so this actually led to speculation. Maybe God created beings like us on another planet that never sinned. If they'd never sinned, they would not be in need of redemption. And some have gone so far to say, well, this text is saying that Christ died one time, one place for all, but as God dying on the cross, is it possible that his death on the cross had a transcendent effect? In other words, that his one-time sacrifice not only atoned for the sins of all humans who sin, but of all beings elsewhere in the universe of sin. So this passage doesn't put a definitive constraint, but most scholars of the Bible would say, well, one time, one place for all. This would seem to at least suggest that there may be life elsewhere in the universe, but not life like us that's physical and intelligent and in need of redemption from their sins. And then we have this passage in the Psalm 104:24. How many are your works, O Lord, and wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. And a number of theologians over the centuries, and this is particularly a fervent debate in the Middle Ages. It was during the Middle Ages where there was the most fervent debate amongst Christians about whether or not extraterrestrial life exists. But the one thing they all agreed upon, if there is extraterrestrial life, God is the one that put it there. It's not like today where you got people speculating, well, maybe random physics and chemistry leads to a bacterium being formed, and maybe evolutionary processes like gene exchange, mutations, natural selection, epigenetics, maybe that naturalistically took that one bacterium and made human beings. But as you look at the Psalms and and Isaiah, it makes it quite clear, hey, all life is here because of the handiwork of God. And if you're interested, you can read our book, Origins of Life, on why we basically look at the physics and chemistry and say the only way that can be manipulated so that you can make something equivalent to a bacterium is if you got someone a whole lot more intelligent and knowledgeable, technologically equipped, and better funded than our top biochemists. Because our top biochemists, in spite of all their technology and funding and education and brilliance, are unable to even duplicate the most trivial steps in making the origin of life. Life has not yet been made in the lab. In fact, they've actually taken bacteria where they'll take out just one crucial protein and then try to put it back in to bring it back to life. It doesn't work. If you kill a bacterium, you can't bring it back to life, and we're not able to make life from scratch. On the other hand, you can read Fazal Rana's, my colleague's, book, Creating Life in the Lab, where he says what they have been able to do is to take a living microbe and re-engineer that microbe so that it has different characteristics. So for example, they will take microbes and re-engineer some of the genetic material in it so that it will manufacture the equivalent of petroleum. So that can be done. So there's been re-engineering, but that's the limit of what biochemists have been able to do. So that's a scientific argument. I'll talk about that next week, about why God alone must be the creator. But looking at Psalm 104, if you read the entire psalm, you notice that the psalm is talking about no matter where you go on the face of the earth, the highest mountains, the deepest oceans, go into the crust of the earth, you find life everywhere. Life has been found even 2 miles below the surface of the earth. So if you go down into a deep coal mine, you will find microbes there. Life is everywhere on the face of the earth. And as you see in Psalm 104, the earth is not only abundant with life, it's also very diverse. And so reading Psalm 104, it's God packing our planet Earth with as much life as possible, as diverse as possible, for as long as possible. Matter of fact, our human civilization just wouldn't be possible if God hadn't packed our planet with a maximum abundance of life, with a maximum diversity for 3.8 billion years, because it takes that amount of time and that huge abundance and diversity in order to have all the biodeposits, coal, oil, natural gas, marble, limestone, that we need to launch and sustain our civilization. And so people looked at Psalm 104 and said, when you read that psalm, God seems really intent on creating to the maximum degree. Why would he stop at one planet? And so they were arguing that the universe must be filled with life. Then you have this passage in Isaiah 45:18, where it says, he did not create it, referring to the earth, to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited. And so again, it seems like God appears to really enjoy creating life in great abundance with great diversity. Why would he stop at just one inhabited planet? And so on that basis, theologians, even 2,000 years ago, but especially in the Middle Ages, were arguing the universe must be filled with God's creatures. We can't be the only place in the universe. But the counter to that, and again this goes back right to the first century, is they say when you look at the Gospels and other biblical texts, what you notice is that God conserves his miracles. He's conservative in the miracles he performs. And what I mean by that, God does not perform gratuitous miracles. He performs as few miracles as are necessary to fulfill his purpose. I mean, you get a hint of that in the book of Acts, where you see God performing miracles to break down supernatural barriers of the gospel, but where those barriers don't exist, you don't see God's miraculous hand. And so miracles do occur, but apparently God performs as few miracles as necessary. Some examples of that is what you see in John chapter 6, where you have Jesus taking a few loaves and 2 fishes and multiplying it so it could feed 5,000 people. He actually did that miracle twice. But we notice in John chapter 6, after he performed this miracle of feeding 5,000 men plus women and children from the lunch that a boy had provided for him, the crowds followed him. It's like, hey, that was a great meal you served. Will you do it again? And what Jesus told them, you're chasing me for the wrong reasons. I did that miracle to make a spiritual point. All you're looking at are the physical benefits of that miracle. I'm not going to do it again. So he refused to repeat the miracle of multiplying the loaves and the fishes. In fact, if you read John chapter 6, he goes into great detail about what this food implies in a spiritual context, and how the breaking of the bread that we have in communion, for example, and this is what they did. He multiplied the loaves, so there's bread for everybody. But he says when we celebrate communion and break the bread and eat it, that's a symbol for my broken body, how my body will be broken. It'll be killed on your behalf. And it's a breaking of my body that will open up the door so that you can come into the presence of God the Father himself. In fact, last week when we were going into those passages about the death of Jesus, what we notice is that a couple of those texts made the point. The moment that Jesus died, the curtain that blocked access to the Holy of Holies in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. That curtain was 20 feet by 20 feet and 4 inches thick of felt. And so this is clearly a miraculous event where the curtain was torn, but the curtain was there as a symbol in the temple, making a point. Because of our sins, we're not able to come into the presence of God. But when Jesus died on the cross, the curtain was ripped, and that now made it possible for us to come into the presence of God. If we receive the offer of redemption that Christ made for us on the cross, based on his broken body, we can come into the Holy of Holies, come to the presence of God the Father. He will not refuse fellowship with us. And then also in communion, we celebrate by drinking of the wine, and that's a symbol, as it says in John 6, for the blood that Jesus shed in our behalf. And it's through that shed blood that we have power from the Father. So his body, the bread, symbolizes the fact that we now have open access to God the Father, and the shed blood is symbolized by the wine means that we now can gain power from the Father to do his will. But the point here is, we see in John 6, you're coming after me because you want me to perform a physical miracle. I came here to do a spiritual redemptive act for you. That's the whole purpose. This was a symbol. And we also notice that when Jesus, just before he went to the cross, Herod wanted an audience with him. And what does it tell us in Luke 23? The reason why Herod wanted an audience with Jesus, he wanted to see Jesus perform a miracle. And so he pressured Jesus during the interview he had with him in his trial, and Jesus was silent. He refused to do the miracle that Herod wanted. So it's texts like this that people go to, and you can go to several in the Old Testament as well, that makes the point that God apparently performs the minimum number of miracles to achieve his purpose. And how this plays into the debate amongst Christians, are we alone in the universe? Does God really need another planet, like planet Earth, inhabited by beings like us, in order to achieve the purpose for why he created the universe? And it will go to texts like you see in Titus 1:2 and 2 Timothy 1:9. What you see in 2 Timothy 1:9, it says the grace of God that we now experience was put into effect before the beginning of time. Or what you see in Titus 1:2, the hope that we share in Christ was given to us before the beginning of time. And in a couple of my books, I actually list all the passages in the Bible that talk about God's activities before he created the universe, before he created anything. But what's significant about all these different passages, of which 2 Timothy 1:9 and Titus 1:2 are just two examples, is that each of these texts makes the point that God was actually active in beginning his works of redemption before he created anything at all, which would imply that everything that God created was for the purpose of redemption. And again, this leads to the question, does God need beings like us who are spiritual, intelligent life, spiritual, who have sinned and are in need of redemption? Does he need that to happen on more than one planet to achieve his purpose? And a lot of theologians argue, no, he doesn't. In fact, it tells us in many places, the angels in heaven, referring to the righteous angels, that they are watching. You see this in Hebrews and 1 Corinthians. The angels are diligently focused on us, watching us to learn about the grace of God. The difference between us and the angels are not constrained to the universe. They're far more powerful than us in what they can do. We are constrained to the physics of the universe. They are not. They can come into our realm, but we cannot go into their realm. But where we have an advantage over the angels, we directly experience the grace of God. As it says in 1 Corinthians and Hebrews, the angels observe the grace of God. So they are spectators to the grace of God. We are participants in the grace of God. And that explains why Paul makes the statement, do you not realize, as he says to the Corinthian Christians, a time will come when this universe no longer exists, where you'll be judges and teachers over the angels, because you've been trained in a way they have not been trained. But what we see in Corinthians and Hebrews is the angels are watching one planet. They're observing us. Their whole focus and attention is on this planet. And so theologians over the centuries have argued that they believe that this implies that we are the only intelligent spiritual life that's in need of redemption. But again, this does not constrain God from creating dolphins on another planet or horses on another planet. It would simply constrain him from creating beings like us. And there are theologians that say, well, maybe it's even possible that what Christ did on the cross atoned not only for us, but atoned for other beings that would be in need of redemption. It's God after all. He's not constrained by the physics of the universe. But there are these texts that people have gone to that make the point. It seems like the angel's focus is just on this one planet. And also there seems to be the implication God does not perform unnecessary miracles. And if you read through the 66 books of the Bible, God's redemptive work seems exclusively focused here on planet Earth. But as I mentioned before, this debate amongst Christians has been going on for 2,000 years. For 2,000 years, they've been debating whether or not extraterrestrial life exists. They've been debating whether does it exist on Mars, does it exist on the moon, does it exist on planets orbiting other stars. But I think the key point here is neither the existence or the non-existence of extraterrestrial life have any significant bearing on the Christian faith. I say that because I've engaged a number of atheist scientists in debates and discussions I've had with them where they have this belief that if astronomers find life elsewhere in the universe, then that would be catastrophic to the Christian faith. They have this belief that the Bible teaches explicitly that this planet Earth is the only site where life exists in the universe. Well, that's a possible interpretation of the Bible, but these scientists are incorrect in claiming that the Bible explicitly states this Earth is the only place where God has created life. And often I share with them saying, well, for certain, we know that God created at least one other species of intelligent life, because look how frequently the Bible talks about angels. So we know at a minimum, God has created two distinct species of intelligent life. We human beings, and then you got the angels. And so, yes, they have a different realm than we have. I remember debating Victor Stenger at the International Skeptic Society a few years ago, where he said, hey, all this fine-tuning you're talking about as evidence for God, if you've got different life, wouldn't you have different fine-tuning? I said, well, yes, I agree with you. The angels have different fine-tune requirements than we do. They're living in a different realm with different physics. But I argued, just like our realm is fine-tuned, their realm is fine-tuned. Just like you need a God to explain why we humans exist, you need a God to explain why we angels exist. And incidentally, if you want to see that debate in detail, it is in the Reasons to Believe catalog. I think we sell it for $5. The Skeptic Society sells it for $30. But we keep it at a low price because we want you to see that debate. But that was an interesting component of that particular debate. Now, this is what you see in the theological literature on the question, does extraterrestrial life exist? You know, in reading through that literature, the thing I've noticed is I think they've neglected probably the most significant biblical question on the existence of extraterrestrial life, and that is the future. I mean, as I look at these 2,000 years of debate, the whole focus is on what God did in the past. But the debate over whether God created extraterrestrial intelligent life weighs greatly on Christian eschatology. And if you're not familiar with that term eschatology, it's a theological technical term which means the future, the end times, what God will do in the future. And so the question of whether or not extraterrestrial intelligent life exists does have a really significant bearing on what you think about end times prophecy, or what you think of what the Bible teaches about what's going to happen in the future. Because indeed, if there are other planets in the universe with intelligent life on it in need of redemption, then who's to say that they were all created at the same time? They could have been created at different times. And one thing that we do see in the astronomical literature is that when we look at the physics of the universe, it's clear that we humans are here at the minimum time. Yes, the universe is 13.79 billion years old. I'll get into some of this next week, but that's really the minimum time whereby, given the physics and the chemistry of the universe, you could have intelligent beings existing in the universe with the capability of developing technology and civilization. But astronomers have made the point that doesn't rule out intelligent life in the future. However, it raises an interesting theological point. If God is intent on creating beings like us on another planet, and this is in the future, then that means we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for all these end times prophetic texts we see in the Bible to be fulfilled. Because, things might be all taken care of here on planet Earth, but not on another planet that's got beings like us. And so, and this gets into issues about how do you interpret premillennialism and amillennialism. I mean, Kenneth Samples on our Reasons to Believe staff, he's an amillennialist. I'm a premillennialist, but he's often pointed out from an amillennial perspective, this is not an issue. Because if there is no millennium, then that doesn't mean that you're going to have to wait 1,000 years on planet A, then 1,000 years on planet B, 1,000 years on planet C. And if those 1,000 years are not all beginning at the same time, then if we're the first, then we're going to have to wait a lot longer to enter the new creation than we otherwise would consider, if indeed, we're going to be entering the new creation. And when I read what the Bible's got to say about the new creation, Revelation 21 and 22, it's a wonderful place. Totally different physics, different dimensions. And as it tells us in 1 Corinthians 2:9, it's a realm that's so wonderful and beautiful and loving that not one of us can think or imagine how great and wonderful it will be. But this is where I think there's debate in terms of what does the Bible say about extraterrestrial intelligent life has the most significant theological bearing. Because if we indeed are the only physical intelligent beings in the universe that are in need of redemption, then as soon as we fulfill the Great Commission, take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world, the creator of the universe said he would return to earth, and if you're premillennial, he reigns for 1,000 years on earth. If you're not premillennial, then you can all immediately go to the new creation. Either way, it's a relatively short time period, but if indeed God has created extraterrestrial intelligent beings that are like us and in need of redemption, then we could be looking at some significant time delays before all that can happen. And that's just the beginning as speculation. As I've been sharing this with the scholars here at Reasons to Believe, it's amazing how much speculation you can get on this issue of extraterrestrial life and the context of what Christ did for us on the cross, and what does this mean for entry into the new creation? What does it mean from a premillennial perspective, what the 1,000 years will look like? I mean, it tells us in Revelation that God locks up Satan for 1,000 years. Well, if Satan is a tempter that brings sin on several planets and not just one planet, then again, does that mean that Satan has to be locked up for 1,000 years on multiple planets, all at different times? Or some have speculated, is it possible that Satan's imprisonment for 1,000 years here on earth or in the lake of fire takes into account all possible extraterrestrial beings? This just gets you started on what can happen in terms of speculation. In fact, I'd be just curious as to what kind of ideas all of you have about what the Bible says or does not say about extraterrestrial life in the universe. And incidentally, as I'm going to talk about next week, there's a whole different cosmic perspective in terms of microbial life based on life forms that are bigger than microbes. So we'll be getting into that in the next 2 weeks. But I'm going to stop here and take any questions you might have on this issue. Are we alone in the universe? And what are the theological perspectives on this? What are the biblical constraints? What are the biblical freedoms? And what kind of speculations do you want to bring up to enter into this? And by the way, we'll be taking questions from all of you that are here in person. We'll also be taking questions from people that are part of the virtual audience. And again, you can tell your friends, just go to paradoxes.org. The link is there if they want to participate. And you basically have to take our URL, and it's the YouTube Live that gets you in there. Okay. Any comments, questions? Yes. Doug.
Oh, yeah, the microphone.
Yeah, this is all being recorded, and we want to get a good quality recording. So yes, please wait for the microphone.
Okay, you mentioned earlier that we'll be teaching angels, and I'm thinking, angels have been around a long time. And so what are we going to be teaching the angels? You mentioned that they just observe grace, they don't participate in it. But what is so different about our experience from theirs? I mean, if they see it.
Well, you're raising a really good point, Doug, because they've been around a whole lot longer than we have. And so you might say, hey, we've only been educated about God's grace for 60, 70, 80 years. They've been around a whole lot longer. As it says in Job chapter 38, the angels were witnesses to God laying down the foundations of the earth. And Job 38 doesn't get very specific about the laying down of the foundations of the earth, but from a scientific perspective, that's taking us back at least to the formation of the first continents, maybe even earlier, which means they've probably been around for over 3 billion years. And nowhere in the Bible does it tell you exactly when the angels were created. So some have speculated the angels may have been created before God created the universe, which means if you've been around for billions of years, you should soak up a lot of education and knowledge, way more than what we humans have been able to soak up in 30, 40, 50, 80, or 90 years. How can Paul make the comment that a time will come in the new creation will be judges over the angels and teachers over the angels? And what Paul tells us is that we are the partakers of God's grace. The angels are the observers of God's grace. And he talks about the grace of God being an unfathomable mystery. And, even though we are experiencing God's grace, and incidentally, it's not just believers that experience God's grace. The Bible tells us that God pours out his grace on everyone, believers and unbelievers alike. And those of you that have been with us in this Paradoxes class for several decades can remember about a quarter of a century ago, we actually got into that subject. How does God bestow grace on unbelievers? How does he bestow grace on believers? And what's the difference? And there's about 5 different ways that God bestows grace on all humans, but about 10 ways that he bestows grace upon believers. But Paul speaks about the grace of God as being an unfathomable mystery, so unfathomable that these angels are intently observing us. And so we are on stage. You may think that you have a private life. Well, not really. The angels are watching us. It also tells us the dead in Christ, humans who have died ahead of us as followers of Jesus Christ, they're also watching us. Now, I wouldn't get too concerned about to what degree of detail they're watching us, but they are watching us to some degree, especially to see the impact, the outworking of God's grace. But yeah, that's the unfathomable mystery, Doug, how it is. If you've been a Christian, say, for 30 years, experiencing God's grace for 30 years, how is it possible that in just those 30 years, you've developed enough training and knowledge and experience that you'll actually be equipped to be a judge and an educator, a teacher of the angels who've been around for billions of years?
Follow-up, yeah.
Yeah, use the microphone. Use the microphone. We can come back to you.
I forgot it now.
Oh, we'll come back to you.
I hate it when that happens.
Got a question from the YouTube audience. Kit West asks, given the vision that Peter saw from his rooftop trance in Acts, along with the horses shown in John in Revelation, would you rule out animals in heaven?
Okay, would I rule out animals in heaven? No. What it tells us in Revelation 21 is that God will create again. But this is Romans chapter 8. The moment that the full number of human beings that God intends to redeem have been redeemed, then God will replace his universe with a new creation. He spoke the universe into existence. Romans 8:23. A time will come when he'll speak it out of existence and replace it with the new creation. And give me the rest of the question again, please, Jamie.
Oh, it was, sorry.
Yeah, what about the animals? Okay.
Yeah. Would you rule out animals?
I wouldn't rule out animals because Revelation 21 doesn't rule out animals. It says that God will create again in the new creation, but it doesn't tell us what he will create. You got a single sentence where it talks about the kingdoms that'll exist in a new creation. And what it tells us is that God is going to take redeemed human beings and they'll be magistrates. They'll be rulers and managers over this creation. But God has not told us what he's going to create. So it's certainly possible that he'll create animals in the new creation. A big debate amongst Christians is whether or not the animals we have here on earth are going to be with us in heaven. And you got passages in Ecclesiastes, for example, that suggest that those animals go to the dust, but that doesn't rule out the possibility that God will create animals in the new creation. I'm comforted by the fact that God never takes anything away from us without giving us something better. And I love what my friend Robert Shank said, Bob Shank. He heads up a ministry. He was on our board of directors in the first couple of years of Reasons to Believe. And he says, my position on animals in heaven, dogs will be there, but cats will not. So, but the whole point is, God on purpose ensured that we would form these strong emotional bonds with these creatures. And as I've explained in my book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job, he does that for a reason, to make the point. Notice I designed them to serve a higher being, namely you human beings. They were designed to come to you and to serve and please you. And notice that because of your sin, these animals that were designed to come to you and serve and please you run away from you. Likewise, it's your sin that causes you to run away from God or to pretend he doesn't exist and causes you not to serve and please him. And so these animals were designed to teach us lessons. And people have speculated those lessons won't be necessary in the new creation. And so there could well be animals in the new creation, but don't be surprised if they're quite different from the animals we have here. And as far as the horse that Jesus comes back to earth on, a number of scholars, Bible scholars, have argued that could be a literal horse. But even if it is a literal horse, it's got figurative implications. Because notice when Jesus came into Jerusalem, just before his sacrifice on the cross, he rode on a donkey. And when you look at the Old Testament, the donkey is a symbol of peace. And the horse is a symbol of war. And so when Jesus comes the second time, he doesn't come on a donkey. He comes on a horse. He comes to conquer and put away all sin here on planet Earth. And so scholars have argued, well, it might be a real horse, but it might not be. It might be just a symbol, and even is a real horse, that horse does have symbolic implications. And there's a difference between why Jesus chose to come on a donkey in his first coming and why he chooses a horse in the second coming.
I remember my follow-up.
Remember the follow-up?
Okay.
Okay, we got another question right over here.
What do you think that the purpose of all the other celestial bodies and galaxies is?
Okay, good question. I'll be covering that very briefly next week, but it's in quite a bit of detail in The Creator and the Cosmos, the 4th edition, and especially in my next book, which is probably going to be out in early June, Designed to the Core. Making the point that given the laws of physics that God chose to govern the universe, gravity, thermodynamics, and electromagnetism, the universe must be the precise mass that it is in order to get the elements essential for life. That if you make the universe slightly less massive than what it is, then the only elements that will ever exist in the universe are either nothing but hydrogen or hydrogen and helium. It's in the first few minutes of the Big Bang creation that the universe goes through a temperature window where hydrogen can be fused into helium. And how much helium comes out of that hydrogen determines what elements will be fused in future stars. So if you've got less than 24% helium being fused from the primordial hydrogen, the future stars will not be able to use that hydrogen and helium to make any heavier elements. On the other hand, make the universe slightly more massive, then so much helium is fused from the primordial hydrogen during the first 3 or 4 minutes of the existence of the universe that the future stars, being super enriched with all that helium, very quickly convert all the hydrogen and helium of the universe into elements that are heavier than manganese. It'll be iron and everything else heavier. Notice in both cases, you end up with a universe with no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, no phosphorus, and no possibility for life.
So the parameters for that possibility are so narrow.
They're really narrow. In fact, they're so narrow that if the only factor governing the expansion of the universe was the mass of the universe, you'd have to fine-tune the total quantity of the mass to within 1 part in a quadrillion, 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 quadrillion. Now, it turns out the fine-tuning of the mass is not quite that extraordinary, still extraordinary, but now we know there's a second factor governing the expansion of the universe, and that's dark energy. But in order to get life in the universe, you have to fine-tune dark energy to 1 part in 10 to the 122nd power. So that's another 62 zeros you got to add after those first 60 zeros. So yes, the answer to your question is, if you want to have human beings in the universe, even if all you want is microbes in the universe must be precisely the mass that it is. It's also important to fine-tune how far apart the stars and galaxies are. So the size of the universe likewise must be fine-tuned to make life possible in the universe. Now, as you'll see in the debate I had with Victor Stenger, he says, well, if you use different laws of physics, you wouldn't need a universe that big. But it takes those laws of physics as tools in God's hand to efficiently and rapidly eradicate evil from the universe. And my book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, explains why you have to have thermodynamics, gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces fine-tuned to the degree they are in order to have such a rapid, efficient eradication of evil and suffering. Okay, part 2. Doug.
Yeah, it's just real short. I've seen the verse that talks about us judging angels, but I haven't seen the verses that say that we're going to be teaching them. So I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that, please.
Sure. Yeah, and you're reading in the English translation. If you actually look at the original Greek, the concept of judging also includes teaching. And Paul, and the author of the book of Hebrews, is making the point that these angels are observing us intently to learn about the grace of God, and therefore the implication is, well, hey, when they get to actually have intimate fellowship with us in the new creation, they're going to be asking us a lot of questions, and we're going to be able to instruct them in a way that they wouldn't be able to figure out on their own. A good analogy is, a lot of us take courses at different colleges and universities, and those courses equip us for a future career. And you also see this in Paul's writings. He says, live your life here on earth for all that it's worth. He uses the analogy that this life that we live in these few decades is a race. And he basically says, You want to run the race of life like an athlete does, realizing when you cross the finish line, there's a prize. Just like it is when you go to a university, you take a bunch of courses and they give you a diploma. And that prepares you for a future career. And Paul makes that point. When we enter the new creation, we're not going to be it's not going to be leisure. We're going to be given careers. And so just like our labor here on earth is not in vain, our labor will continue in the new creation. But it's going to be really enjoyable labor.
So it's linked to judging, the teaching. But when you say judging, I think of God judging. You would think God would judge them, and I think of them, whether they'd be redeemed or, judged in the hell or something, but it's not that way, I guess.
Well, we're going to help them appreciate and understand the grace of God. And, just like there are conflicts with people, that will happen with all beings. And so basically helping them to build and develop relationships. And so judging, at least as I read that text in 1 Corinthians, I don't see it as a negative judgment. I see it as something that's positive. We're helping them to enter into a more fulfilling, loving relationship with one another, with us, and with God. And we can help them because we've experienced God's love to a degree that none of them have.
Yeah, I'll study that word judge.
Yeah, good. Yes.
Hey, so I have a question. In Isaiah 9:7, it talks about how there will be no increase or no end to the increase of his government. And so if we take that to actually mean no end and not like, at some appointed time, I mean, do you think that means that we will be partaking in other creations in the, age to come, or procreation's possible in the age to come, or,
Well, interestingly, I didn't cover that text, but that text does show up in the medieval literature as to the fact, he's going to be governing people on planets all over the universe. Another way to look at that, though, is that, his government will never cease in terms of the future. So you can interpret that spatially. You could also interpret it temporally. Most Bible scholars put it in a temporal context. His government will never end. He'll always be the Lord over all of his creation. And as we look at the Revelation 21 and 22, that's the new creation. But notice there's nothing in the book of Revelation that says that will be the end of everything that God creates. And again, you can cite all these texts in Psalms and Isaiah. It seems like God really enjoys creating. But he enjoys creating for a purpose. God's stated purpose for creating is to magnify the expression of his love. So if God is going to be creating beyond the new creation, it'll be in the context, the new creation is where my love has been magnified to a degree far beyond any of you angels or humans could have ever imagined before I put you here. You've seen nothing yet. I'm going to continue. And you look at what we see in Genesis, where God creates for 6 days and rests on the seventh day. Some Bible scholars have speculated that's a new creation. God's going to create again, but it's a creation week. And maybe God's got an infinite number of creation weeks scheduled on his calendar. Who knows where it's all going to end? But evidently, there's going to be a crucial role that redeemed humans will fulfill in being co-magistrates with the Lord. And so we participate with him in the governing over whatever he creates. But there's no end to what we can speculate about what God's going to create or not create and what our roles are going to be. But we're told no one can think or imagine how great and wonderful it'll be. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, when Christ is present here on the earth during the millennial period, will God's grace still be available?
Will God's grace still be available? Well, again, not everybody here at Reasons to Believe is premillennial, but I am. And others, I'm not the only premillennialist here. So I really do take the position that Christ will return, put an end to evil here in the face of the earth, but rule for 1,000 years here on the planet Earth. And he'll be governing during that 1,000 years. And my personal interpretation of the millennium, it's a period of time somewhat analogous to what happened in the days before Noah, where God said, hey, I'm going to let you live a lot longer than 80 or 90 years. And you're going to see that it's really to your benefit to have a short lifespan, not a long lifespan. Look what happened during the days before the flood. And likewise, I kind of look at the millennium as another experiment or lesson that God puts us through. Because during those 1,000 years, he's once again going to allow people to live a lot longer than 80, 90 years. In fact, it says someone who only lives 200 or 300 years will be looked upon as someone who died in their infancy or their youth, as opposed to living out their full lifespan. So long lifespans will be restored. In fact, as I read what the Bible says about this period of time, it's like God takes away every human excuse for why we sin, except the real one during the millennium. A lot of people say, Satan made me do it. Says, well, don't worry about that. I'm going to lock him up. So Satan's locked up. You can't blame Satan for why you sin. You can't blame the fact, I didn't even know you existed, God. He's going to be ruling as king of planet Earth. You're going to be able to see him on television every night. So no one can use that as an excuse. You can say, well, the economy was horrible. I had a bad upbringing. Literally all those external things will be removed. And he says, I'm even going to take away carnivorous activity because people have blamed that. But what does it say at the very, in the Revelations, at the end of the 1,000 years, God releases Satan from his prison and allows Satan to go out throughout the earth to tempt all the children that have been born during the millennium. And yes, God's grace is being poured out throughout this whole time. But what the text tells us, the majority of the children born during the millennium choose to rebel. But not all. A large minority will say no to Satan, and they will say, I want this relationship with the creator of the universe. Basically making the point, it's just like it is today. There really is no different. The real reason we sin is Jeremiah 17, 9 and 10. It's the wickedness of the human heart that motivates us to rebel against God. You can't blame your external circumstances. But to answer your question, yeah, God's grace is going to be just as evident during the millennium as it is now, if not more so, because he's going to be here in person. Yes.
The CERN Hadron Collider. I wanted your feedback on why was it invented, and is it part of big tech's move to tamper with the spiritual dimension, talking earlier about angels and alien intelligence and, extraterrestrials, etc. And the CERN Hadron Collider, is it good? Is it bad? Is it, I just wanted your perspective.
Well, there's a lot of particle physicists that are part of the Reasons to Believe scholar community who actually do research at the Large Hadron Collider here in France and Switzerland. And they would strenuously argue, hey, this is really good. We're learning a lot about particle creation thanks to the Large Hadron Collider. It wasn't really invented. We had particle accelerators before that. There's one in a suburb of Chicago, for example, that ranks as the second most powerful particle accelerator in the world. It's got a 4-mile long particle acceleration pathway. The one in Switzerland and France, it's 17 miles. So it's a little bit more than 4 times bigger than the one outside of Chicago. And it was powerful enough. The real motivation to spending the money and making a much larger particle accelerator was the hope that they'd be able to discover and measure the properties of the Higgs boson. Thanks to what happened at Fermilab outside of Chicago, they said it really looks like the best particle creation model predicts that this particle will exist. But the accelerator outside of Chicago was not powerful enough to discover it. That was probably the biggest discovery and was expected of the Large Hadron Collider. A number of years ago, it did discover the Higgs boson. But now it's being used to discover other particles. And it's being used to try to give us some insight into unified field theory. But as you said, there's been speculation by people who are not particle physicists is that there's a risk that this Large Hadron Collider could produce energy densities of such an extreme level that it could actually create a black hole, and everything could be sucked up into the black hole. So there's a rumor running around the internet that the Large Hadron Collider, by some kind of fluky experiment or mistake, could wind up constructing a black hole that will suck the entire planet into its innards. I can share with you, and as you pointed out, some have also speculated the Large Hadron Collider might produce energy densities of such an extreme level it would actually break through the space-time continuum and bring us into a new space-time realm. So again, speculating, well, maybe everything will get sucked up into a different space-time realm. Now, the refutation of those internet speculations is that we astronomers, for decades now, have been observing sites in the universe where the energy density is thousands of times greater than anything that's possible in the Large Hadron Collider. And nothing like these speculations is ever observed to exist.
So it's conspiracy theories and also... It's conspiracy theories and also it's blown out of proportion that this technology is invented to manipulate time, space, matter, and serve
Right.
as an electronic Ouija board. Because there's different open forums that talk about that. There's buzz
Right.
about,
Well, the bottom line is
and then
that
there's a big infatuation with aliens and
Right, yeah, I'm aware of all those conspiracy
Yeah.
theories. The energy density possible of the Large Hadron Collider is many, many orders of magnitude below making it possible. Now, a Christian friend of mine who chairs the physics department of Baylor University, he's also a member of our scholar community, he actually published an interesting paper saying, okay, there's all these speculations going on about maybe we can come up with an energy density that would distort the space-time fabric. So he wound up writing a paper about what it would take to be able to have a spaceship go faster than the velocity of light. And he said, Einstein's theory of relativity says that's not possible, but there's an important caveat. That's based on the assumption you do not distort in a significant way the space-time fabric of the universe. And he says, it's possible if you're able to have sufficient energy density that you could distort the space-time fabric in front of your spaceship and actually have the spaceship go faster than the velocity of light. However, for a spaceship large enough to house 2 human beings, you would need to convert the entire mass of Jupiter into pure energy every fraction of a second in order to be able to go faster than the velocity of light. So it's making the point, the energy densities you need for any of these internet speculations are many, 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 many orders of magnitude beyond anything we astronomers observe in the universe, and certainly way beyond anything that's possible in a particle accelerator. So no need to worry about those scary physicists in Switzerland and France that are messing around with a Large Hadron Collider. There's no risk that they can do anything of anywhere close to that nature. On the other hand, I'm looking forward to the fact they could conceivably discover an exotic dark matter particle. That would really be great. And it does have the possibility of being able to pull that off, because it's something that's missing from our cosmic and particle creation models. We've yet to find the fundamental particles that are responsible for about 83% of all the mass in the universe.
Okay.
Got a question over here too.
Yeah, we have several questions in very limited time.
Okay.
You want to take yours or? Okay. Okay. So, Tim Williams, in The Creator and the Cosmos, you note that the electron and proton counts much to better than 1 part in 10 to the 37th power. How is that not just an inevitable result of conservation of charge if the universe started out charge neutral? I see a proposed way to explain this fine balance.
Yeah, well, there are other charged particles besides the electron and the proton. And there's every possibility in a cosmic creation model that you could have unequal numbers of protons and electrons. But to keep electromagnetism weak enough that it doesn't distort the configurations of galaxies and make life impossible, it's crucial that in terms of the ordinary matter, ignoring the exotic matter, just looking at the protons and the neutrons and what that means for the assembly of atoms and molecules, it's important that the universe be electrically neutral on a broad scale, which requires that the number of electrons equal the number of protons in the universe to better than 1 part in 10 to the 37th power. And actually, it may be more constrained than that because we now realize that primordial magnetic fields and intergalactic magnetic fields need to be weaker than a billionth of a Gauss. And there's a section on that in Design to the Core that'll be out in June, where I talk about how it looks like the fine-tuning is even greater.
Okay.
I have one question based on your original topic of extraterrestrials. There was this guy named Zecharia Sitchin who wrote all these books about ancient
Yes.
aliens, and he started this whole ancient aliens phenomenon that you see on the History Channel. And I was wondering if you think that these ancient aliens that all these primitive civilizations said they saw were like fallen angels and demons pretending to be gods or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with those books as well as, at least a dozen different History Channel quote documentaries on these ancient civilizations and how the technology we observe in the pyramids and what you see being done in the Incas and the Aztecs here in America is way beyond human capability. Well, as a physicist, I can tell you it's not. You can go to Stonehenge, you can go to the pyramids. What causes people in the 21st century to draw those conclusions is we overlook the degree to which the ancient peoples were willing to invest in those projects. I mean, today, it would be highly unusual for any nation of the world to invest more than 1% of their gross national product, gross national product in any kind of a building enterprise like that. But what you see in ancient civilizations, it was not uncommon for them to invest 25% of their gross national product. It wasn't uncommon for them to employ 100,000 slaves in a building project over the span of several decades. And they weren't that stupid. I mean, what you notice in Egypt, for example, is that the pharaoh employed a team of astronomers, and they made very accurate and persistent observations, plus the fact that Egypt's a desert, and so you got clear skies every night. And so what's in the book I've just finished, special announcement, 8:30 last night, I finished the first draft of my book, Dual Revelation. My deadline was May 1st, so I beat the deadline by a few hours. But in that book, I talk about what these ancients were able to do, because a big debate amongst theologians today is that the ancients really were very ignorant about science, and therefore we should be cautious about reading any science into the Old Testament, because the ancients didn't care about science and they weren't competent in science. Total myth. They were very competent. So competent that astronomers today actually will cite the Egyptian astronomical annals going back 3,000 and 4,000 years ago in order to develop more sophisticated models of the interiors of stars. I mean, they were actually making measurements of the periods of variable stars to 5 places of the decimal. So, and incidentally, the ancients knew the earth was a sphere. They roughly knew how far away the sun was, how big the sun was. They knew how far away the stars were. They knew the stars had to be bodies just like the sun. So they were not ignorant. And also they were good engineers. They understood how to pump water out of a river to irrigate the land. And they understood the principles of levers and pulleys. As a matter of fact, a paper got published where it said, if you look at Stonehenge and these huge vertical rocks that they have there, it says they had the technology where a single man could take one of those 300-ton rocks and put it in a previously dug hole in the ground. Because you go to Stonehenge, only 2/3 of the rocks are above surface. The other third is below. And what they would do is they would dig a just right shaped hole, but literally using the appropriate levers and pulleys, a single man could plant the rock in the hole. And so the whole point is just using simple tools that are available at that time, and what they knew at that time, they could achieve everything we see in ancient civilization. They don't need aliens to tell them what to do. They don't need demons or angels to tell them what to do. The humans at that time had all the knowledge and motivation. And what I'm arguing in my new book is they were way more motivated than we are today.
What do you think about where the theology came from, all these polytheistic religions like the Egyptians and the Mayans? Where do you think they got that from?
Well, I think they got that from their heart. I mean, it tells us in the Bible that we humans are fundamentally in rebellion against God. And instead of putting our worship on the one true God, we worship the creation. And what you see in a lot of these pagan ancient religions, the gods represent different created entities. You got the god of the water, the god of the stars. So it's just like what you see in Romans chapter 1. They're transferring their worship from the God that created the universe to what he actually created. And what you see in a lot of these religions is they have a whole lot of gods. And notice how those gods treat one another. They treat one another like we humans treat one another. That's one of the unique things about the Bible's message compared to the religions that surrounded the ancient nation of Israel. The gods of the Egyptians, the gods of the Sumerians and the Akkadians, they're gods that are just as immoral as we are. So they're killing one another, they're raping one another, they're behaving just like we're behaving. So once again, it's Romans 1. We're transferring the worship from this morally pure, perfect God who can do anything he wants to what we see that's created. So the very fact that the gods of these other religions are representing natural entities and are behaving just like we do, I think it's just basically saying they're no different than people today. I run into highly educated atheist scientists who say, isn't it amazing what nature has done? They're crediting the creation rather than crediting the creator. So it's not just people of the ancient times. People in all ages have done this thing.
The Egyptians didn't have telescopes, though, and yet they understood.
Here, we're going to get a microphone to you.
No, actually, we're not, because,
We're not?
no, I
We're out
have
of
the
time?
last question and we're time up.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
You can
This-
bring your questions next week.
yeah,
But
this,
as I said at the beginning, we're going to have about 30 minutes for teaching and about 40 minutes for Q&A, because I want to protect your Sundays. So you can save your questions for next week.
yeah, this one comes from a couple of weeks ago. It didn't get a chance to get posed, and it comes from Tom Wee in Germany. And he says, Dr. Ross, thanks for your detailed answers to my questions. He says, are there any in the RTB community who, like me, would take a day-age interpretation of Genesis 1 through 5, such that the first creation day lasted 10 billion years, from the initial creation event, 13.77 billion years ago, until the translucence of Earth's darkened atmosphere about 3.8 billion years ago?
Yeah, good question. And that's actually fairly similar to my interpretation of Genesis 1. Namely, I believe that the creation days are consecutive. Each one is a long period of time. But there's nothing in the Genesis text that tells us they have to be equal periods of time. And if we look at what we see in the 6 creation days, very roughly, it seems like the days get shorter and shorter as you go from day 1 to day 6. So day 6 would be the briefest of the creation days. Creation day 1 would be the longest of the creation days. But I also agree with Tom that there's a period of time between the creation of the universe, Genesis 1:1, and the beginning of creation day 1. And in my book, Navigating Genesis, I cite Jack Collins. He's actually going to be here for our Dual Revelation workshop. I also cite a member of our San Jose chapter, physicist who is fluent in biblical Hebrew, Rodney Whitefield. Both of them have analyzed the first 3 verses of Genesis, making the point that the grammatical structure, and particularly where the verbs show up in the sentence, implies that there is a passage of time between the creation of the universe and the events of Genesis 1:2, where the Spirit of God begins brooding over the surface of the waters. And likewise, there's a period of time between what you see in Genesis 1:2 and Genesis 1:3, where you get to the beginning of creation day 1. I also agree with both of those scholars. The Bible doesn't tell you how much time. It does imply there was a passage of time. Exactly how much, we don't know. So yeah, you could easily have, say, 3 billion, 10 billion years between the creation of the universe and the beginning of creation day 1.
Thank you. And with that, would you dismiss us in a prayer?
Sure. Let me close in prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this technology where we can meet in person, get a good quality recording, and at the same time engage people through YouTube Live. And Father, I pray that you would help us to continue to improve this experience for all concerned. And Father, especially I pray that you open each of us up to receive more grace from you. Thank you for the time we had today to talk about your grace. Lord, grant us the humility that we can receive more of your light, more of your love, and more of your truth, and more of your life. And Lord, give us the love to share that with other people we meet this week. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thank you.
When do we lock the doors here? Do we have fellowship?
Yeah, we'll be